Hi guys, welcome to lesson 2.1, integers and absolute value. Please have your books open to page 57 so you can follow along. That will be a big help. Once you have that, we're going to start right away with vocabulary. I'm a big fan of that. And you'll notice right off the bat on page 57, there are 3 vocabulary terms. I have them listed here. We have integers, negative integers, and positive integers as well. Integers, I like to call them as counting numbers. That's just kind of how I define them in my own words. Another way of saying it would be any number, either negative or positive, it doesn't matter, or 0, which is neither negative nor positive. But any number that doesn't have any sort of decimal or fraction attached to it, it's just the number by itself. I'd say whole number, except for whole numbers are positive. Negative integers, if you have a good understanding of what integers are, negative and positive integers are not going to be tough. Negative integers are all the integers that have a value of less than 0. Positive integers are just going to be all the integers with a value greater than 0. So, in my example, my negative integers are -1, -2, -3, -4, -5. My positive integers would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 0 is right in the middle. He is neither positive nor negative, but he nonetheless is still an integer, so don't forget about him, otherwise he becomes sad. I've got here on the next page a number line, and you can see kind of how this models what we just kind of went through there. All the positive integers are to the right of the 0 on the number line. All the negative integers are to the left of the 0 on the number line. So negative integers start at 0 and go to the left. Positive starts at 0 and goes to the right. Now, when we talk about greater than or less than, which we will in a few moments, but when we talk about greater than or less than, we're so used to just looking at the positive side of the number line. And we say, well, 4 is the biggest one on here. 4 is greater than 3. In fact, over here, though, on the negative side, -3 is actually greater than -4. It's not about how far away it is from 0. It's about how far it is to the right. So the greater numbers are, greater integers are going to be the ones that are furthest to the right. 4 is greater than -2. -2 is greater than -4, and so on. Okay, now in your book, we have this example here, and we're going to go through it. You can follow along with me. It says the Global Positioning System, aka GPS, which I'm sure you guys have all heard of, can be used to determine elevations of several countries. Which country in here, in the table here, has the lowest elevation? So now in our table here, just so you understand what we're looking at, this table shows the lowest elevation in each of these 5 countries. United States, Canada, China, Bolivia, and the Czech Republic. So if you go in each of those countries, find the lowest elevation, this is it. This is it. We're going to work on graphing these in order to use the graph to answer this question: which country in the table has the lowest elevation? Now, the furthest one all the way to the left side is going to be the answer, because that's the least. It does, and notice that some of these have negative signs on them. That it implies that they are, this would be 154 meters below sea level. So that's, like a negative value. So even though it looks like a bigger number, 86, negative 86, I should say, we're going to find is actually greater than negative 154. So here's how we're going to do this. First, we have to set up our number line, and I've got one started here, but I don't have it filled out. Now, as I look at this, I've got to make sure that I include values that go far enough to the right or far enough to the left that encompass all of these values. So if I look at this, On the positive side, so on the right side of the equal sign, I got to make sure that I go past 115. On the left side, the negative side, I've got to make sure that I go past 154. So I'm going to make both of these go all the way up to 200. And so here I go. I'm going to need, and you don't have to write 200 different square or 200 different hash marks. Instead, like this, I'm going to, I should actually label this guy 0. And then I'm going to count by 50. So 50, 100, 150, and 200. Going in the other direction, I have negative 50, negative 100, negative 150, and negative 200. And I tried to make them as even as I can. I think on the left side here, on the negative side of the number line, I was a little bit uneven, but I think it's good enough that I think you guys can understand where I'm getting at. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick each of these elevations here. So I'm going to start just from the top and go down. United States is between negative 86 meters. That's our lowest elevation. Excuse me. So I'm going to come down to my graph and I'm going to find where 86 would lie between. Negative 86 is going to lie between negative 50 and negative 100. And it's probably just a little bit further towards the 100 than the 50. So I'm going to put a mark right here. And I'm going to label that negative 86. Okay, so if I'd count backwards between negative 50 and 100, I have, you know, a little bit more than 3/5 of the way there is where I'm trying to put that dot there. Closer to 100 than negative 100 than negative 50, but somewhere in between those two. Canada's easy. Canada's right smack dab in the middle. So I'm going to put a dot right there, and I'm going to label that 0. And so now I have the United States, I have Canada, and I could even put, if I wanted, I could put the countries' names in here as well. Your book doesn't do that, but that's not a bad idea to do. My next one is China, negative 154. So I don't have a negative 154, but I do have a negative 150. And so now I got to ask, where's 154 got to be in between? Is it going to be between negative 100 and negative 150? Or is it going to be between negative 150 and negative 200? It's got to be really close to this line, either in the right side or the left side. And it's going to be between negative 150 and negative 200. So right past that line, I'm going to put another dot. I'm going to label it negative 154. In parentheses, that's China. So I can move on to Bolivia. Bolivia is their lowest elevation. Excuse me again. Their lowest elevation is 90 meters. So 90 meters is going to be between 50 and 100. It's going to be a lot closer to the 100 than the 50. And this one shouldn't be too tough. These ones are a little tricky because they're negative. Over here, we've done this kind of stuff. You've done this kind of stuff in years past. You know how to find between 50 and 100 where 90 would be. But I'm going to label it anyway here, 90, and that is Bolivia. And last but not least, the Czech Republic is about the same distance, maybe a little bit more on the right side of the 100. Because it's more than 100, it's between 100 and 150. And I got Czech Republic right there. And voila, I've got them all listed. I've got them now. What I've basically done is I've taken all these values, these elevations, and I put them in numerical order from least on the left to greatest on the right. So if I'm trying to answer this question, which country in the table has the lowest elevation, I can easily look on my number line and see that the furthest one to the left is China, and there's my answer. Okay. Now, if I turn the page to the next page, page 58, I have another vocabulary term, which is absolute value. Absolute value refers to the distance between the number that you're talking about and 0 on a number line. So for example, the absolute value of a number is written as, the absolute value of a number n is written as n inside these little bars, okay? So anytime you see those little bars there, that means absolute value. Now I'm also going to point out right now that these bars also function as grouping symbols. So far, if I would take on another sheet of paper, if I would kind of keep track of all the different grouping symbols that we've come across, there are a lot of them. You know, a lot of times we give too much credit to parentheses, but there are parentheses, there are brackets, there is a fraction bar. This is A. I got to do all of A first. I got to do all of B first before I can do the division. Now we have absolute value bars. Okay, so our list is growing of different grouping symbols. So we got to treat these as grouping symbols as well. Now sometimes they're not always going to have anything in them, any extra work to be done, but it might just be a number, and that's okay. That's a piece of cake. That's easy breezy. But if there is ever a time where, for example, you have, if I take this sheet out again, you know, I might have, what's the absolute value of 2 plus 3 times 6? So now if this was the case, if this is what I'm looking at, I would end up having to do what's inside here before I do anything else that's outside of here, if there's like a -1, for example. Okay, so in order to do this, I have to do my multiplication here to show you all my steps here. This will be 2 plus 18, the absolute value of 2 plus 18 minus 1. 2 plus 18 is 20, so the absolute value of 20 minus 1. The absolute value of 20, which we'll get to, is in fact 20 minus 1, which is equal to 19, and there's my answer, and I'm running out of room on that paper. But you get the idea, so you got to treat that as grouping symbols. I'm also going to point out that the absolute value of 0 is 0, okay? It is neither negative nor positive, so we're going to just kind of skip it and move on. Now, again, absolute value is the distance between the number and 0 on a number line. So I don't really care necessarily whether this is negative or positive. I've got a couple examples down here. I have the absolute value of -5 and the absolute value of 4. Now I've written a number line up here, and I've kind of shown you -5 is right down here. +4 is way up here, okay? And I don't really care if it's so far to the left or to the right in absolute value. I'm just trying to figure out how far is this gap from 0 to -5. And you see I've got it kind of marked here that the absolute value of -5 is 5. I'm simply finding this as a positive value. How far away is it from 0? How many jumps would it take to get to from one place to the other? Now, a lot of times people confuse absolute value with something that we're going to talk about in a little bit, which is opposites. However, I'm just going to give you a little preview about what opposites are. Opposites would just be changing the sign like this, okay? Except for that's not really what absolute value is. Absolute value is always going to be positive. My answer is always going to be positive. So if you ever have homework where you have to find the absolute value of something and you give me a negative answer, you should probably check your work and say, something's wrong here because this should not be negative. I mean, you're never going to have a negative number, okay? So here I go again. I'm trying to just ask, how far is it from 0 to 4 or 4 to 0? I don't care. How many jumps am I going to have to take? And I've got it kind of labeled here again. It's 4 jumps. So the absolute value of +4 is +4. Take a close look at that. The absolute value of -5 is +5. The absolute value of +4 is +4. Absolute value is always positive. All right. So if your book asks you to find some absolute values, here's a couple examples that might find their way into your homework. negative 3 and 2. What's the absolute value of negative 3? Well, how many jumps would it be from 0 to negative 3? That's 1, 2, 3 jumps. I don't care if it's in the negative way. My answer is positive 3. And what about 2? Again, it's 2 jumps from 0 to 2. I don't care which direction it is. It happens to be in the positive direction, but the absolute value is also positive. So my absolute values are always positive. Please remember that and don't make a simple mistake like that. Opposites. Opposites are numbers that have the same absolute value. So if they're a different number, but they have the same absolute value. Well, that's a fancy way of saying it in the math book, but in my own words, or in other words, they are just the same digit with opposite signs. So for example, negative 3, there we go, and positive 3 are opposites. For example, here's negative 3, here's positive 3. How far is it from negative 3 to 0? Well, that's 1, 2, 3 jumps. From positive 3 to 0 is 1, 2, 3 jumps. I don't care that it's in the positive direction or the negative direction. Again, but opposites are the same distance from 0. Each one of these is the same distance from 0. So again, these are not opposites. Negative 3, the absolute value of negative 3 does turn to its opposite, positive 3, but yet the absolute value of positive 2 remains 2. So again, your book is going to ask you to find